Hi, my name is Cindy Rang with the Fabric Patch in Ephrata, Washington, and this is our 6th class in our row sampler series. So it's our 6th class, but it's our 5th row. And the row that we're going to be doing this time is the Scallops row, and it's the one that's on the top of this quilt up here. The block itself is called either Black Beauty block, or if you put a 9 patch in there, they also call it Wonder of the World. And then at the end, I'm going to show you how you can use it on a border. So this is a quilt that's called Quilter's Garden, and it's just a really nice way to use up an all-over print and a border print to make kind of a cool quilt. So we'll talk about this at the very end. So for those of you guys that are experienced quilters, what we're going to talk about is freezer paper templates. So if that's something that you're real familiar with, you can maybe kind of fast forward around a little bit. We're also going to talk about some different products in terms of glue sticks, and we're going to talk about the blind hem stitch, and that's how we're going to sew this down. If you are a hand appliquer and you want to hand applique your scallops down, that would be fantastic. But what we're specifically going to show this time is how to machine sew down your appliqued edges so that it sort of looks invisible. We are going to be doing a hand applique class later on in the series. So we just thought we would get the machine sewing out of the way first. And I think they call it hand applique by machine when you use that stitch. So anyway, so let's go ahead and get right into it, and we'll talk about a couple of things. First, I want to talk about freezer paper. I have mentioned the freezer paper applique multiple times, and if you watched any of the mask videos, I talked about it. I get a ton of questions about that. And I think it's something that I've not really thought about very much because I've used freezer paper as a template material for probably, I don't know, 30 or 40 years. So it's just one of those things that you just don't really think about. So I'm just going to spend a couple minutes talking about freezer paper. This is it. It's just in your kitchen aisle, inexpensive. It's just freezer paper. And freezer paper has, it's of course paper on one side, and it used to have wax on it, but they changed it up a little bit. And so now it's just kind of this funny, it really is a plastic coating. And some people were nervous about it and said, well, I don't know that I want to melt plastic on my fabric, but it's not like that. It just gets soft and sticks ever so gently to your fabric. It's not really in the melting plastic realm of things. However, if you don't want to use that, you can use regular template instead, and we'll talk about that. But I love freezer paper. I use it all the time. It is not the same thing as parchment paper. I've got hundreds of emails. Well, all I could find is parchment paper and it didn't work. It would not work. Freezer paper, again, it has this coating for a reason, and I think, again, what you're really supposed to use it for in the kitchen is like wrapping your meat or whatever and things don't get stuck. I don't think I've ever used this in my kitchen. I use parchment paper all the time because parchment paper is, of course, just this bakeable paper. So I use this on my cookie sheets whenever I'm baking cookies, and it's non-stick. I use this over non-stick spray. It works fantastic. Totally, totally different from this. All right, and then let me show you, there's two different styles of this. So this is just your Reynolds inexpensive freezer paper, and notice the thickness of the paper, right? This is called Quilter's freezer paper. It comes like this. There's a package of 25 of them for like 10 bucks. But what it is, you can see it's cardboard stock. So the way that this will work is if you want to photocopy, if you don't want to do the tracing part and you want to go ahead and scan this in, this will go right through your printer. Inkjet printer only, not laser printer, because of course laser printer prints with ink, with heat, and you don't want to get any of that plastic anywhere on your print head. But so it's nice and stiff that way. The other thing is that if you decide that you don't always want to heat it down, it's a thick enough paper that you can use it as a tracing template. So I'm going to show you this in detail, how we use this in just a second. The other thing I want to talk about is thread. So we've talked about Aurifil thread before. It just happens to be my favorite thread. It's a 50 weight thread. There's no lint in it, and it's nice and lightweight. We're going to come in closely to these colors so you can see if you think that there's a better color for you to be able to use. These are some that we've recently added to our website. There are hundreds of colors, so we're sort of slowly adding some of the more generic colors that you can use. So what I almost always use is black, and I don't know where my white is, and then I use 2620 and 2026. 2620 is a slate gray, and so when you use this on anything dark, it's going to absorb that color, so it'll look dark brown on dark brown, it'll look dark purple, it'll look navy blue. It is this magical thread that becomes the color that you're stitching on. The same thing is true with this kind of pale banana yellow. It will do the same thing on anything that's a pastel color. It'll look lavender, it'll look pink, it'll look light blue, sort of weird stuff. But anyway, I never ever run out of these two colors and black and white. And again, it's 2026 and 2620, my two favorite colors. All right, so, and then we're going to do this stitch together. The other thing I want to talk about is the glue stick. So let's look down here for a second. There's a glue stick that I use, and I'm going to show you when we do it. And the one that I really like is the Quilter Select, and you'll see why when we use it. When we use this, it's a fluorescent yellow, and it shows up fluorescent yellow until it dries, and so you can tell where you've glued and where you haven't, so it's kind of nice. So I love this one. These two are extremely similar. There's really no difference. The only difference is in price. This one is $9. Well, it's $8.99. This one is $10.99. So you think, well, gosh, you know, for the same thing, this is $2 less, but it comes in this. This one is $7.99 for 2 refills, and this is $8.99 for 4. So it's kind of like when you decide to buy a printer. If you buy an inexpensive printer, sometimes it's because you're going to spend more in ink. So it's the same thing with your glue sticks. Go ahead and spend just a little bit more because you're going to make up the difference in your refills. So anyway, or if there's another glue stick that you like, or again, if you're for some reason opposed to using glue, you can pin. It doesn't really matter. The other thing, and we've talked about these before, is I like to use a specific marking utensil, and I just like my mark to come off. And so I do like these because these all iron off, and they come in enough colors that if you're using something dark or medium or light, you'll be able to see the color. The other thing that we'll use for this are these thermal thimbles, and what they are is when you're using the iron and you're folding over that edge, you'll see that I'll have these on, and there's different sizes. So there's one for your thumb, and there's a small, medium, and a large, and what happens is it'll protect your fingers when we're ironing. So I'll have these on later, and these are inexpensive and they last for forever, so these are also nice. All right, so let's go back to your pattern. So this is your pattern. It's your row 5 scallop pattern, and then this is your template that you're going to use. And so your pattern tells you that you're going to need 5 of your background blocks and 20 of your scallop squares. So if you look at my block, I did use the background. You don't have to use background if you don't want to. If you want to put a little more color in there, if you're doing a lot of stuff from your stash, you can go ahead and do that. And again, this particular block is called the Black Beauty block. I don't know why, I probably should know that. And if you put a 9 patch in there, it has this really cool effect. And if you do the 9 patch, you just want to make sure that you end up with a 10-inch square. And I think the math on that is maybe 3 3/4 inch blocks to be able to do that. But make these blocks, we only make 5 of them, and when you put this together, you've probably already done the math in your head, and you realize that your block is going to come out 45 inches instead of the customary 48.5 inches, and that's okay, because if we pan up for just a minute, you're going to see the first hint of what we call coping strips. So if you look over on the side a little bit, see there's a little strip there, and there's another little strip over there. So we'll add coping strips in different places. There's some here too for different reasons, just to make sure that we get our row the size that we want it to be. So don't fret, and that's why, again, I've said every single time, don't worry, just get your block together, and we don't really care so much about the math. I mean, we do, but this is really more about learning all kinds of different techniques. So what we're gonna do with these blocks, of course, is we've started with our background square, and we're gonna make all of our little scallops. We're gonna fold over these ends. We're gonna fit them all in there so they fit perfectly coming into the corners. So they'll fit in like this. We're gonna top stitch everything down, and then we're gonna sew our blocks together. So what we're gonna start with is tracing our template. Again, I do like just the regular inexpensive freezer paper just because I go through it so much. I use it on everything. And if you look at this, this is my shiny plasticky side, and this is my paper side. But your paper side still, it has just a slight little bit of a coating on it, and so you don't want to use ink. If you use ink, what will happen is your ink will smear just a little bit, and you really don't want ink anywhere near your fabric. So I always just use just a regular pencil. So I'm just gonna lay this down, and I'm going to trace this over, and I would probably start with probably 4 of these, because what happens as I iron this down, you'll see how sticky it gets. It only stays sticky for about 3 or 4 times, and then I have to start over. That's really the benefit of this, is that it has just a little bit more of that plastic on it. It's really what it's intended for, so you can use this 6 to 8 times, and that's what the difference is. All right, so then I'm going to cut this out, and people get freaked out because I will use my nice sewing scissors on paper, but it's because when you cut with paper, not that I would give anybody permission to use my scissors on their paper, but what really dulls your blade is the residue from the paper. And so all you have to do is just have a piece of wool, and this has to be 100% real wool with lanolin in it, not felt wool. And then what you can do is you can clean your scissors, clean all of that paper wood residue basically off of your scissors, and your scissors are still sharp. It isn't true that it actually dulls your scissors cutting in with paper. It's because of the residue that's left on there that will end up dulling them. All right, so I've cut this out. And at the end, when I show you the Quilter's Garden quilt, I'm going to show you how to make your own template and how to do that math if you have some other specific things that you want to put scallops on. All right, so now we're going to come over to our iron. And here is one of my, what are they, 4.5 maybe by 11 or 4 by 11 pieces. I'm gonna go to the wrong side of my fabric. And I do like to use Best Press. I like that better than starch. And if you've pressed all of your fabric though, leave it off before you do your freezer paper, because your freezer paper doesn't like to stick to the starch. So I'm just gonna go ahead and lay this down, and I always leave just a little bit left over. You have quite a bit of room there. And now see, all that's gonna happen, this is just a hot iron. And again, there's no fumes, there's no plastic fumes coming up, it's not like that. All I'm doing is I've just stuck this paper down. And so what's happened is that tiny little bit of plastic, it's barely on there, but can you hear that? I don't know if you can hear that or not, but it's kind of peeling up just a little bit. So it's just enough that it will stick to the fabric, not enough that it leaves any kind of plastic residue, not enough that there's any fumes or anything. It's not, you know, an environmental issue. But again, if you do not want to do that, all you have to do is get a cardstock. In the olden days, back in the 70s, all quilting was done with templates anyway. So we used to use cereal boxes, and we would cut all of our templates out of that kind of cardboard, and you could do that same thing. But then what you'd want to do is lay your template down on top of your fabric, And then again, if you have different colors of pencils, depending upon what color you're using, just go ahead and trace. Just trace around so that you know what your size is. However, keep in mind, this is the size of my scallop. So if you want to trace something, you want to make sure you're adding 1/4 of an inch when you're cutting all of that. So what I would do, no matter what, this is the size of my template. So whether it's because I have an ironed down piece of freezer paper, or if I've traced that, the same thing will happen. And what's going to happen is I'm going to cut 1/4 of an inch past that template. And all you have to do is eyeball it. It doesn't really matter. You know, all you're going to do is fold this over the edge so you don't have to be, you know, fussy so much. I think it's, you know, people think that quilting is really fussy, but the truth is the only thing you have to worry about is cutting accurately, pressing accurately, and 1/4 inch seam allowance. The rest of it, you can just kind of have fun. So again, I have my freezer paper down. If you've decided to draw, that's still okay. But what happens is now what's going to happen is I'm going to press this over the edge. Again, this is why I like the freezer paper, because it's just thick enough that I can feel that when I come over, I can feel that edge right there. So if you're using this, it's a little bit thicker. If you're using some other kind of cardboard or template, you're still going to want to leave it there just so you have a little bit of an edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, this is where I would use my little finger pressers. And I have my iron. And I do use Best Press. If you use a starch or a different one, that's okay. So I'm just going to put this on here. And then I like to start in the center. And this is just if I accidentally touch my finger, I don't burn myself. And I'm just going to come around. And so see what's happened, and then I'll do the other side. And I don't know if you can kind of hear that little sizzle, but what's nice is that little bit of starch. So what happens is I have this nice folded over edge, so it's pressed over so that I have a nice clean edge when I'm going to sew down. And then what I'll do, once I've put that Best Press on there, I don't put it on again, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel this freezer paper off. And then I can use this one again. You can see that that looks a little worse for the wear because again, it's just simple paper. If you were using the thicker one, it would hold up through that a little bit better. Do not add Best Press again at this stage, or else you will flatten that seam that you just put in there. But I'm just going to come back and stick that down. So I'm nice and done. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my 10-inch square. I'll get this one out of the way here. And where's my glue stick? And so then this is where your glue stick comes in. And so what's nice about this glue stick is that when I put that on there, oh, oops. When I put that on there, are you able to see that fluorescent yellow? I can tell my glue stick is getting down to the very end. But it's just this little bit of glue. This glue will wash out the first time you wash your quilt. It is not a permanent glue. It's a fabric glue. Its only purpose is to hold everything down while you're sewing. It's gonna wash out in the wash and you'll never know that it's there and you can't feel it. So then what's gonna happen is I'm gonna tuck this up, and so see where I want to come in right there? And I want to come in right there. So here's the point. I'm just going to lay all of these down. Just stick that down. And I'll do that with all of them. After I've done that, and I've already done that with these, I'll flip this over and I'm going to go ahead and trim off that edge just a little bit. I purposely cut it long just to make sure that things will fit in there. It gives you just a little bit of room just to make sure that no matter what, you're coming right off of that point right there. See where that point is? Just to make sure I'm coming off, and that everything kind of butts right up against each other. So you can be a little bit fussy with it. You glue everything down, and once everything is glued down, again, all of this is going to hang off the end. You're just going to go ahead and flip it over. And when you flip it over, use this as your guide. Lay this on top of there. Take your rotary cutter and trim that off. Oh, I guess I don't want to cut on the table, but that's what I would do. Trim that whole thing off right there, and that's going to give you this nice clean edge all the way around. All right, we're going to go to the sewing machine. Okay, so here is my scallop block, or again, also known as Black Beauty block. And I have all of my scallops in place, and you can see that I have everything butted up together. It goes right out to the point, and everything is glued in place. The reason everything, again, is glued in place is so that I don't have to worry about it when I'm sewing. If you would rather put pins in, you can go ahead and do that. The other thing that's happened is I've trimmed everything off so that my block is a complete 10 inches. So let's look at our sewing machine. A couple things are going to happen. One is you want to go ahead and choose a wide foot. So if you sew on a FAF, that's either the 2A, which is what I have on, or the OA. But you just want to make sure, since you're doing a blind hem stitch, you just want to make sure that you have a wide opening here that you can use. And then the other thing that you're going to do is you're going to select the blind hem stitch, and it looks like this. It's stitch number 16. This one is similar, but this one is a blind hem for elastic, and so it has just that little bit. And what we want is we want a stitch that's going to stitch. I'm going to show you what it's going to do, but it's going to stitch right along the edge, and then it's just going to all of a sudden go in and just take a little stitch, and then it's going to keep going and take a little stitch and keep going and take a little stitch. So you really won't see it as it stitches in the ditch. All you're going to see is a little stitch that it's going to take. All right, so again, on my machine, the blind hem is stitch number 16. And when it comes out, it's going to come out on this factory setting, which has the 4.5 width and the 15 length. You can adjust that, and if you just want to take a little practice piece of fabric and kind of decide what you want, you can have your little stitches a little bit closer together, a little bit farther apart. See what's happening? Or a little bit closer together. The other thing that you can do, and what'll happen is if it stops, it's because it doesn't want you to go any farther than that. The other thing that you can do is you can make this point a little bit shorter or a little bit taller. So you can kind of play with that until you feel like you get the stitch that you want. What I usually do is if I have a perfect invisible freezer paper applique stitch that I like, I'll go ahead and write down that I liked the 2.5 width and the 12.0 length. So whatever it is that you choose. All right, and the other thing too is I did not change my thread. I'm going to go ahead and intentionally sew this with white thread just so that you can see my stitch and see what's happening. So again, I have this glued down, and so it's not going to go anywhere. It's kind of nice and stuck there. And when I start, I'm going to start, and what'll happen sometimes is if you bring your needle down, you can sort of see where it's starting, because if you look at that, do you see it's sort of off center just a little bit? Your machine might be a little bit different, but for ours, you know, when we're doing that blind hem, we're kind of staying within that about 5 millimeter or so that it's using. And so your center line is going to be off just a little bit. So I just want to stay right there where I'm in the ditch. And so that's why I've brought my needle down to see right where I'm going to start. And now I can go ahead and watch that. So as we sew, what's going to happen is there's my first stitch. It starts with that. I'm just coming along that edge. And then I oftentimes will have to sort of just reposition a little bit. And I'm just staying, whoops, whoops. Right along that edge. All right, so let's stop for a second. I'm going to spin this around so you can see it. So see what's happening. In fact, let's look down here. Well, no, let's look up here because you can see this better. So see, here's my little stitch that I take, and then here it's staying right in the ditch. Here I got off just a little bit, so I'm actually on my fabric, and then I kind of made it back off a little bit. So little squirrely, which is why you want a thread that's going to not show up so much. So if we look at this, down here, you can see this is where I've already done it. So we've stitched around. So this is that light gray thread. And so we've stitched along, and here's my little stitch that's come in. We've come along that edge, and we stitch in, come all the way to the end. See my little, where I've stitched that down, and then when I sew these two blocks together, that gives me that 1/4 inch when I sew everything back together. Going to come out of this edge and come all the way around, and then just keep doing that. And so you can see that that's why they call it the invisible applique stitch, because you really don't see it. And even here, there's another little example where instead of being in the ditch, I was kind of on the edge of the fabric. But if you have a nice thread that blends in, you won't see it at all. Here, you can't see anything at all just because of the type of fabric. And so that might help you also to choose the fabric that you want. Anything that's solid, you really are going to see any little thing that's going on. The other thing too is this blind hem stitch. This is what works great for this invisible applique stitch. If you decide you want to do a decorative stitch, if you decide you want to just come in and do a straight stitch all the way across, that's okay too, whatever you'd like. But this blind hem is kind of a nice favorite. So anyway, then once you've done that, once you've sewn down all of your blocks, and again, I'm just going to come all the way in, I'm going to come back out, I'm going to come all the way around all 4 sides with the right color of thread. And then I'm just going to take all 5 of them, oops, something's happening there, and I'm just going to sew them together. So I've sewn this one together, sew this one together, sew all of them into my row, and again, that's what gives me that 1/4 inch seam allowance up on the top so that everything is going to end up right on the point. Okay. All right, so this quilt is called Quilter's Garden, and I made this years and years ago, but it was all because I loved this fabric. And this fabric is of course no longer available, but you could easily recreate this. There is a pattern. The pattern has this on it. This is on the website. And it's really just 4 fabrics. It is your all over piece that you just kind of cut that you just love. There's a dark piece here that's going to be your scallops, a little inner border, and your binding. There's a medium piece that's going to be your scallop background and another border. And then this particular line had a border print. So border prints are really nice, but I feel like if you're doing the border print, you really do have to do a mitered corner. If you don't have a border print for something that you're doing in here, just anything that's kind of pretty, it gives this nice 10-inch border. So the quilt ends up about twin size. It's kind of nice, and what happened in the border in the pattern, is I went ahead and did all of the math for you. So I tell you exactly what size to cut this, exactly what size your scallops are, what the width is here. This is of course your 10-inch border, and I think this is a 3.5-inch border. So you don't have to make a lot of decisions if you don't want to. But if you have something and you just want to add some scallops to a pretty little baby quilt or something, I'm just going to show you how you can do that math and do it yourself. So just fair warning, this is a math talk. Some people don't care for quilters math, but I'm just going to share a couple tips with you. So the deal with scallops is that in order to make sure that it looks right and everything fits in there and you don't kind of have a half a scallop at the end, you have to make sure that they're all sort of the same size and they fit in there properly. So what you want to know first is you want to measure your borders, measure the width and length of your piece so that you know what size you're going to need. So let's say that we have a quilt, and let's say that it is 36 by 42. Well, that would be perfect because 6 inches is divisible by both, right? 6 times 6 is 36. 6 times 7 is 42. So that would be easy. We know that our scallop is going to be 6 inches. So that would be nice and easy. If it's not, let's say that your quilt is 34 inches by, I don't know, 44 inches. So let's see, 4 inches goes into 44. 4 does not. 4 times 8 is 32. So what you could do, you could go ahead and shave off something if you want to, if that's possible, and you could make this a 32-inch by 44, or if it's really not possible to shave anything off, you just add borders. Add borders, and it might be a big border, it might be a border on all 4 sides, whatever you want to do to get yourself up to a number that is divisible on both sides. So whether that's a 5-inch scallop, if we want to get this up to now 40, we're going to go ahead and go for it and put a pretty big border. 40 by 50, we know we're going to do 10 5-inch scallops on this side, and we're going to do yeah, that's right, and we're going to do 8 5-inch scallops on this side. So that's the only math part. That's all you have to worry about. So now that we've done that and we know kind of what the width is of the scallop, I'm just going to show you how you can get kind of a really nice visual. So if you went ahead and you've done this and you know that this is your, let's see, this is your 40-inch piece. This is just adding machine tape, just paper. And so you just roll this off. So this is my 40-inch piece, and I'm just going to go ahead, fold it in half. So I've got 2 pieces, fold it in half again. Now I have 4 pieces, and fold it in half a last time, and now I have 8. So this is 5 inches right here, and you can see, whoops, I should put my glasses on. You can see that this is where your scallops will be. Does that make sense? So now what you can do is decide the size of your scallops. If you're doing something bigger, you're doing an 8-inch scallop, what I tend to use a lot is just a plate. So all you have to do is you can line this plate up and get this plate so that you have a nice arc the way that you want it. So if this is going to be 4 scallops instead, I'll line that up and draw that so I have a template to use. If I'm doing 5 inches, you might use a bowl, or in this case I have this coffee cup. And so you just bring that up until you find an arc, and I don't think you'll be able to see that, so I'm going to go back to the plate. You can see that because of this 10 inches, that's really not a scallop at all. So you'd want to use a bowl and get that up the way that you want it. So you'd bring that up, make your scallop, and I bring my scallop all the way down to the corner. So this is where I folded it. So if I'm doing a 10-inch scallop, this is my template for my scallop. So I would go ahead and transfer that to my freezer paper. I would do it the same way that we did with the others. I would leave my edge on there, and then you still have your background piece. So I kind of like a background piece that has a little bit more going on so you can really see it. Whereas in this one, if this were your actual one, you really don't have very much showing there, but you can kind of play with it a little bit. The scallops are fun. They really add something that's kind of a special little look to that. And then what I did, I think on this particular one, instead of doing the blind hem stitch, I just stitched it down when I quilted it. So I just have some, maybe you can see better on the back, maybe. Yeah, so I just did some feathers in there, and then I just did some lines on that. So anyway, all right, so kind of a fun project. Scallops are easy to do. They add a little bit of a pizzazz to a border. It's easy to do your little math if you want to make it for a specific quilt. So hopefully what you'll do, certainly will get your Black Beauty scalloped row done for your row sampler, and then maybe you'll end up adding some scallops to a quilt on a border. So happy quilting.